Chronicles of Narnia are just 7 great books, whether you read them in chronological order or publication order. I'm not saying that it's going to completely ruin the series if you read them in chronological order. However, I will say that I think you'll have a much better experience, a much more powerful experience, and Lewis's intentions, you can see them more clearly if you read the series in the order he originally published them in. I think the book that suffers the most from being read in chronological order is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And it's really 2 key characters that you see this. The first one is Ashland. Ashland really suffers. The most famous example is in Chapter 7 of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Like I said in the last video, Mr. Beaver says the famous line,
"They say Ashland is on the move, perhaps has already landed." And now a very curious thing happened. None of the children knew who Aslan was any more than you do. But the moment the beaver had spoken these words, everyone felt quite different.
None of the children knew who Ashland was any more than you do. If The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is the first book you've read in the series, this makes perfect sense. Yeah, I have no idea who Ashland is. This is the first time I've heard his name. However, if you're reading the series in chronological order, and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is book 2, so you've already read The Magician's Nephew, this is very confusing. You do know who Ashland is. You learned quite a bit about him in The Magician's Nephew, so this is a very confusing line. This is one of those things, this is not really open to interpretation. This is not really an opinion. This is a clear contradiction. This doesn't make sense if you're reading the series in chronological order. This is just the beginning of Lewis starting to create a sense of mystery and anticipation over who this Ashland character is. Just hearing his name causes the 4 children to feel these really strange, intense emotions, and we have no idea why. Later, when the White Witch hears the name of Ashland, she completely freaks out. So we're just starting to wonder, who is this Ashland guy? When the children sit down and have dinner at the Beaver's house, we start to learn a little more about him. Okay, he's the king. He has been gone for a while. He's come back now. Oh, he's a lion. Should we be scared of him? Like, well, yeah, you should, and yet you shouldn't. Don't worry, he's safe, but yes, you should be scared. Okay, so this is kind of a complicated character for slowly learning more about him. And obviously we see a huge demonstration of his power when Father Christmas returns. Okay, Christmas is back, and it's all due to Ashland. And then the snow starts to melt. Wow, what a demonstration of Ashland's power. So by the time we actually meet Ashland, Lewis has been spending a lot of time and effort setting him up, creating a sense of mystery and anticipation. That's a huge part of what drives, especially the middle act of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. All of that is basically lost if you've already read The Magician's Nephew. You do know who Ashland is. Lewis is wasting his time trying to create mystery, anticipation over a character you already met in The Magician's Nephew. In general, when you read the series in publication order, we know what the characters know. In The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Lucy steps through the wardrobe, and if you're reading this as book 1, we are just as surprised as she is when she finds there's a magical world inside. If you've already read The Magician's Nephew, maybe you already know, you probably assume, yeah, the wardrobe is probably magical, it was made out of that tree. You're not that surprised, and you also know why. You have a sense of why it works. Another character that suffers quite a bit is Professor Kirk. Now, we meet this character in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then a few books later, in The Magician's Nephew, we see him as a small boy and find out, okay, he's not just Professor Kirk, he's Professor Diggory Kirk. And this is a character you'll have a kind of a different experience with, depending on which order you read the books in. If you read the series in publication order, and you're reading Chapter 5 of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, there's a scene where Peter and Susan go to him and say, what do we do about the fact that our sister is telling this crazy story about a magical world in the wardrobe? We really are in Peter and Susan's shoes here. We're just as surprised as they are when he starts making his case. Maybe you should actually believe her. That's crazy. And then you listen to his case and it's like, wow, his case actually makes sense. He develops a logical case for why you should consider believing Lucy. It's a pretty cool scene. If you've read The Magician's Nephew already, if you're reading the series in chronological order, then you kind of have a different view of this scene. It's more, I think it's from the beginning you go, okay, he knows. He totally knows. If he's been to Narnia before, he knows why it works. He's not surprised at all. So really he's just toying with Peter and Susan. All this stuff he's making about trying to make a logical case, it doesn't mean anything. He's just, of course he believes him because he's been there. Now that's kind of true in a sense, but I think that if you don't know, the fact is he does make a really compelling case. So if you don't know he's been to Narnia, you're just focused on, wow, those are some really, really good points. So I just think you'll have a very different perspective on this whole scene, depending on which order you read the books in. It's a much better experience, much more powerful scene if you read the books in publication order. Also at the end of the book, I just think you'll have expectations about this. If you've already read The Magician's Nephew, you're going to have expectations about this character that are not going to be fulfilled. Once the professor heard their story, wouldn't he reveal himself to the kids? Obviously, at some point, we know that he did. But I think if I've already read The Magician's Nephew, I'm going to read the end of Wardrobe, and I'm going to expect a scene about that. What's his reaction to the fact that, for example, Aslan's death? Did he ever find out about that? That was sort of his fault. He brought the White Witch there in the first place. That's part of the reason Ashland had to die, to defeat the White Witch. What's his reaction to that? It's just not addressed at all. And of course not, because it's not really an important part of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe story. It wasn't really worth going into if it was book 1. Had Lewis written that as book 2, I have no doubt he would have, explored that Diggory character a lot more at the end. And of course, the last line of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is,
"And that is the very end of the adventure of the wardrobe. But if the professor was right, it was only the beginning of the adventures of Narnia."
Doesn't this just work better if it really is our beginning of the adventures of Narnia? This just seems like a much more appropriate way to end book 1 than book 2. So The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe suffers a lot if you read it in chronological order. It's just a better introduction to the series than The Magician's Nephew. I think The Magician's Nephew suffers a little bit too. There's just no getting around the fact that it was clearly written as a prequel. It was written to a reader that had already read Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and would want to know more about the backstory. The opening lines of the book say this is a story that's going to tell us how the adventures of Narnia first began. And that line there, I think if you've already read a few books and you come to The Magician's Nephew and say, oh cool, we're going to see how it began, it doesn't have the same significance if you're reading it as book 1. That's kind of Magician's Nephew in a nutshell. There are so many moments in there that they might be cool moments if you're reading it as book 1, but you don't really get their significance nearly as much as if you read the series in publication order. For example, the creation of Narnia, the creation of the lamppost, the origin of the White Witch, and of course the origin of the wardrobe, you're not going to really get nearly as excited about it. Just the creation of Narnia, oh wow, that might still be a cool moment, but if you've already read 5 books to that point, oh cool, Narnia, we're going to see how it started. Or the creation of the lamppost, that means almost nothing to you. If this is the first book you're reading, oh, a lamppost came up, okay. If this is the book 6, you've already read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, oh, that's where the lamppost came from. That was always such a strange image, and now that all makes sense. That makes sense where the lamppost came from. The White Witch, oh, that's how she got into Narnia. That's why she turned white. Wow, it all makes sense. And probably one of my favorite moments in the entire series, if I'm reading it in publication order, is when you find out at the end, that's where the wardrobe came from. For some reason, I just did not see that coming. Lewis tells us, and you might just want to know one more thing. He made the tree into a wardrobe. It's like, the wardrobe, that's where it all started. It all makes sense now. If this is the first book you're reading, though, it's like, oh, he made it into a wardrobe. Okay, it doesn't have, these all might be cool moments, but they don't have the power and significance. The Magician's Nephew is a great book. It'll still work as book 1, but there's so many moments that are so much more powerful if you've already read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So it works better as book 6 than book 1. There are other books, too, I think, that suffer somewhat as well. Prince Caspian was the second book to be published, and in the current order with chronological order, it's book 4. There's this theme of return in Prince Caspian. The full title of Prince Caspian is actually Prince Caspian, the Return to Narnia. Return is a really important theme in the story. Not just the return to the Heaven Seas, but also the return of the old days to Narnia after hundreds of years of corruption. Now, does that theme, is it still powerful? If you read it as book 4, yes, it's still there. But doesn't it just work a little better if this is also our return to Narnia? Once again, it puts us in the character shoes. Just like Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, this is our return to Narnia. So I think that theme just works better. Lewis's intentions with that book shine through better if you're reading it as book 2. Taking a look at the silver chair, there's another scene that you can just tell, just like that Ashland scene in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it was clearly written in a certain order. It just doesn't make sense. Eustace and Jill are eating a Cair Paravel, and Lewis writes,
"And when all the serious eating and drinking was over, a blind poet came forward and struck up the grand old tale of Prince Cor and Aravis and the horse Bree, which is called The Horse and His Boy, and tells of an adventure that happened in Narnia and Calormen and the lands between in the Golden Age when Peter was High King in Cair Paravel. I haven't time to tell it now, though it is well worth hearing."
If we're reading the series in publication order, of course, this makes perfect sense. Yeah, I have no idea who Prince Cor is. I have no idea who Bree is. I don't know anything about these characters. Oh, it sounds like it could be a cool story. It'd be nice to hear it. Too bad Lewis doesn't have time to tell it now. Then in the next book, in book 5, he does tell it. However, if you're reading this in chronological order, this is confusing. What's Lewis getting at here? I've already read The Horse and His Boy. That was already like 3 books ago. Why are you teasing a book I've already read? Once again, they changed the numbers on the spine, but you can't get around the fact that if you just read the books, they were written in a certain order. Now, you would think that if there was one book in the series where it wouldn't matter which order you read the series in, you're going to have basically the same experience, it would be The Last Battle. It's the only book that does not shift position between the 2 orders. But no, I really think that you have a much better experience with it, once again, if you read it in publication order. If you read the series in publication order, you really get the sense that Okay, the last battle, the last few pages, Lewis is concluding a series that began with Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Go ahead and read the last few pages. There's so much emphasis put on the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe characters, especially Lucy and Tumnus. You just get the sense that we've come full circle. He's ending a series that began with the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I also think it's pretty cool how you have the last 2 books in the series, if they're read in publication order, are the beginning and then the end. And there's sort of a relationship there. I can't think of another series that does that. It's just something that's really kind of unique about Narnia. So I think it's a really cool piece of structuring.